What was your "it seemed like a good idea at the time" story? So, back in the day, my brothers and I were shooting a bow and arrow behind our house. We had a proper backstop and a nice target on a bale of hay. After about an hour, we were getting bored, and one of my brothers had a stroke of genius. Let's effing light one on fire. So, there we are, wiring rags to arrows and soaking them in gas and shooting stuff. Didn't take long, and half the yard was on fire. We shot pretty much every flammable thing we could burn in the yard. Since we were running short on stuff to shoot, my brother decided to launch one in a 45-degree arc over the woods behind our house. We all watched soar, laughing and giggling. When it hit the apex was when it dawned on us that this was in fact a really stupid effing idea. All six of us sprinted off into the woods in the direction it had been shot. Wasn't hard to find. It lit an entire little meadow on fire. So we ran around stomping out fires for an hour. When we finally got the fire put out, we were sitting by the creek and my oldest brother looks at us all and says, quote, "Dad never hears a word about this." Story 2. When I was 15, my best friend and I just got new BB pistols. They were the Walter CP99. Looked identical to the real Walter CP9 with a removable magazine and no orange tip. We were playing with them in the back seat of his mom's car. They weren't loaded. We were just excited and wanted to take them out of the box. She knew we had them out and didn't think anything of it. This was the late 90s, by the way. Before going back to his house, she went through the drive-thru at Burger King. You know where this is going. She's ordering food with two large 15-year-olds holding guns and pointing them at everything. Fast forward 30 minutes. We're pulling into their driveway and his dad comes running out of the house, yelling hysterically. One of his friends just called and said he heard on the police scanner that they were looking for his vehicle with two white males holding a female hostage at gunpoint. Few minutes later, several police cars pull in the driveway, jump out with guns out, making everyone get on the ground. It took some explaining on his dad's part about us being a bunch of dumbasses. 15-year-old me couldn't figure out what all the fuss was about, but 34-year-old me looks back and realizes that might be the dumbest thing I've ever done. Story 3. So I was in Uganda with my family, and we see a large, about 5 foot tall, curled up leaf hanging about 8 feet off the ground. We're told that these leaves curl up and fall out of the trees, and they're pretty heavy, so it can be dangerous to have it fall on you. My dad and I think, won't it be helpful of us to just get this thing down? So we're there whacking it with sticks, trying to get it down to no avail. When my dad says, "Hey, climb up on that wall there, son, and jump. Grab it and then pull it down." Well, that sounds like a swell idea, Dad. So I do just that. I don't manage to get it all the way down, but as soon as I hit the ground, I get this burning sensation in my elbow. Turns out there's a hive of Ugandan mud wasps living in this specific leaf, and they do not take kindly to young men trying to tug their home down. So I'm just sprinting back to the office where the rest of my family is sheltered from the sun, and I practically have two elbows on one arm at this point, while, as my dad described it later, an army of large, black blots give chase. I make it back inside and my arm is numb, except for the searing pain in my elbow. Thankfully, there was no further reaction. The pain lasted only around 3 hours and the swelling was down by the end of the day. That being said, it was the worst pain I've ever felt. Even worse than the time I broke my arm into 3 pieces while arm wrestling. Story 4. I was waiting for an excuse to tell this story. So there I was, away on a weekend retreat for young people. I was a helper on the staff along with my wife, and we were on the last day, ready to go home. Well, the message is about Samson and his mighty strength. So, of course, we're all sat around waiting for lunch, and everyone is arm wrestling. Now, I'm staying out of all this young man nonsense when suddenly my wife chirps up, "Come on, Est, get involved." So I'm resigned. I've got nothing to prove and I'm not particularly strong, so I know I'm not going to win. But it's almost home time. I've been stuck sleeping among stinky young men for 3 nights and I see an opportunity to prove to my wife that tonight might be a lucky night. I may not be strong, but I'm stubborn. So I agree. I'm up against an 18-year-old, the victor of our lunch table, and I'm like, I know I'm not going to win this, but I'm gonna stick us at a stalemate. My pain threshold is good enough, and I think I can bear it long enough for him to accept. So we lock, weak arms at first, thank God, and we start. I'm holding my own actually, and our arms aren't moving. Things are going well. So I don't actually remember what happened next. All I know is that everyone is agape. I feel the back of my hand on the table and someone is screaming. My wife explained later that it was me. There was no pain, but my arm had made a loud crunch and flopped down with the force of a young man with something to prove. Immediately, everyone clears the room, and I'm just sitting there like, I think I just broke my arm. Finger's still moving. Feels weird. There's a nurse also volunteering for the weekend who sits with me for the 2 hours it took for paramedics to arrive. Turns out that at around the same time, a lady in the nursing home next door had had a stroke, and we were only in a small town, so she took the priority. Also, turns out arm wrestling position is mighty uncomfortable when held for a long time, but I'm actually pretty chuffed. I've got my wife taking pictures, I'll share them if you like, and we even let everyone back into the room to finish up the weekend so they can all go home properly disbanded. I only cried once, when telling my wife that it wasn't her fault that I was stuck in this situation. So the pain is starting to kick in and the room's empty. Next thing I know, this thing is on my mouth and this guy is cutting my sleeve, asking me all these questions, and time is going real funky. Seriously, the more I breathed, the more everything was like when you film a feedback monitor. Like my brain can't seem to process new information, so it's just recycling all the old stuff on an endless loop. And then they switch the gas off and I'm coming out, and my arm is in this orange inflatable ice pack and I'm being wheeled into an ambulance. Hey, I've had this dream before. Wow, cool. I gotta tell my wife. Turns out I'm huffing the stuff too quickly. Well, now I'm rambling. We were able to drive home that evening, didn't want to stay an extra day, and now I'm famous. Every time we rehost that youth weekend is, quote, the guy that broke his arm wrestling. Story 5. When I was a teenager, my brother, cousin, and a couple of friends decided to try to steal a Coke vending machine by tipping it over into the back of a Ford Ranger pickup and take off. We were like, crap, we'll just put it in our garage and we have plenty of soda and we'll refill it. We had one of the keys for them. It was 2 in the morning and we were all wasted. This was mid-90s, mind you, and way out in the country. There is a little store with the machine. We backed up and my brother and I got it rocking back and forth and finally, blam, into the back of the truck. It lifted the front end of the truck off the ground, and as soon as it landed in the bed, my buddy started hauling ass with me trying to jump into the bed with the vending machine, and my brother hopped on the back of the vending machine, riding it like a majestic horse. But we forgot to unplug it, and for some reason it was just enough that it pulled the machine out the truck with my brother on it and crashed on the ground. We were young, dumb, and bored as hell, but it made perfect sense to me then. Yeah, so this is an early frontrunner for the stupidest story that we've read so far. And also, with anyone else reading this, did it come to mind that statistic that like 8 to 12 people die every year by having vending machines fall on them? I wondered why that was a real statistic, and now I'm quickly finding out that, yeah, people actually do crazy stuff like this. Story 6. I had just finished this bike ride with my scout troop, and we ended it at the side of a river. So, waiting for our parents to pick us up, the boys all go to a rope swing to F around in the river. It was absurdly shallow. The furthest swing would still land you in 3-foot water. Average lazy swing was 2 feet deep or so. Mom comes, some dad hollers at me that she's arrived. I run back until I can see her getting out of her car and yell, "One more swing, Mom, I'll be right back." She seems in a good mood, says okay, starts chatting with other adults there. So, not 2 minutes later, I walk up to her with a broken arm. I had gone back for that one more swing, screwed up, and planted my wrist into the shallow water, broke my arm, got out of the water saying bye without telling the kids what I'd done. Just sort of walked up to my mom, "Hey, I just broke my arm. Sorry." She was not pleased. Like, seriously, flick my bick, you had to go for one more swing. Come on, let's go get you a cast, you idiot. Story 7. Many years ago, I became absolutely smitten with a young woman. She was friendly, intelligent, funny, and almost painfully attractive, with a list of interests and hobbies that seemed like they were a near-perfect match to my own. Within hours of our first conversation, I had decided that the two of us belonged together, and as a result of that decision, I launched myself into a series of increasingly stupid attempts at seduction. There were any number of idiotic misadventures that I could describe here, but perhaps the most ridiculous of them happened to be in the evening before Valentine's Day. I had purchased my would-be paramour a small potted plant, something which I'd been told she'd appreciate more than flowers or chocolate, and I was intent on leaving it somewhere for her to discover, rather than handing it to her in person. While any sane person would have just placed the gift on her welcome mat, I opted for a much less wise approach, convincing the girl's flatmate to give me access to their kitchen. My hope was that I could position the present in such a way that it would remain unnoticed until the next morning, at which point it would seem to magically appear in the morning light. Now, lest you think that I was a complete moron, I should mention that the young woman in question was supposed to be out of the house while I was making the clandestine delivery. Unfortunately for me, she had changed her schedule at the last minute, arriving back at home almost immediately after I had been let in. Her roommate and I exchanged hurried whispers as we discussed a place for me to hide, but since there were only a few seconds to spare, I had to settle for ducking down behind the counter that separated the kitchen from the living room. Had this been a scene in a romantic comedy, a slapstick series of mad dashes and near misses would have ensued. Sadly, real life doesn't work like that, and I was found almost immediately. The girl walked into the living room, asked her roommate who she had been talking to, then made a move to approach the kitchen, which I assumed based on what I could hear. Knowing that I was about to be caught, I huddled as far back into a corner as I could, and then held the potted plant up in front of my face. Hi, Max, I heard the young woman say. You can't see me, I replied. I'm hiding. The good news is that my efforts, despite having thoroughly failed, were more or less appreciated. I semi-sheepishly presented the girl with her gift, wished her a happy Valentine's Day, then explained why I had been sneaking around in her apartment. She graciously accepted, but quite reasonably asked why I had tried such a convoluted way of giving her a present. All I could say was that it seemed like a good idea at the time. Story 8. At a bachelor's party last year, we rented a small house in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The second day we're there, we decide to go to a local state park which had a nice swimming hole. As we were getting ready to get out of the water, one of the locals mentioned a rope swing on the other side of the little island in the middle of the lake. Always being the adventurous person, I decided to swim out with a few of my friends to check it out. There are a couple of locals there, and we watched them go first. It's a pretty high swing off a decent drop, and the water looks to get pretty deep, pretty quick. At this point, I should mention that I'm about 6'3" and 250 plus pounds at this point in my life. I should also mention that I have very little upper body strength. I've been a cyclist and runner most of my life and rarely worked out my upper body. I take the rope swing, go to one of the highest points I could, and launch off. As the swing hits its lowest point, my hands slip up just a bit, but it's enough for me to react by dropping my knees just a bit. As this happens, my feet hit the ground. As that happens, my hands let go of the rope. My left knee smashes into the water's edge, which is much rockier than anticipated. My hands plunge into the water, which is also much rockier than I anticipated. I coast out into the water on my belly and float for a few seconds before regaining my composure and slowly swimming back into shore. My leg is bleeding and my right hand hurts like hell. We go to a local urgent care. Long story short, I ended up with 2 staples in my left knee to close the gash from the rocks. I had x-rays on my hand after the weekend and found out that I essentially shattered my right middle finger. I ended up needing surgery and now have 3 screws in that finger. It has most of its functionality, but it does hurt like hell from time to time. But damn, if that rope swing didn't look like a good time. Story 6. When I was working retail for the first time, I was hired with 3 other people as seasonal employees for Black Friday and holiday season, and towards the end of the day, they would send us to go bring in any shopping carts / buggies that were outside, and usually we would have to push it in ourselves because we didn't have one of those machines that would push it for you. And someone suggested, why don't we just make one huge cart line and push it in instead of having 4 different lines? And everyone agreed, so we get everything and lined up about 60 to 70 something carts. Took 3 of us to push it, and it was so heavy. And the other guy guiding it at the front. We managed to get inside the store and into the cart area, but being a whole line and heavy as crap, we couldn't stop it in time, so it blew past the rail, and unfortunately on the other side of the cart area is where we kept the dishwashers, refrigerators, TVs that are supposed to be going out for delivery / sold. We ended up breaking a TV and denting a fridge. Unfortunately, the store manager was doing his night rounds around the store and saw the whole thing as he was coming down the main hall. We got yelled at pretty bad and immediately just told to go home and to see him in his office tomorrow morning. It seemed like a good idea though, lol. Okay, so I'm assuming that nobody kept their jobs after this, but yeah, typically store policies and procedures, ways to do things, they are tried and true and exist for a reason. So typically any shortcuts that you try to take are typically only going to set you back in the long term. Story 10. My little brother and I found a number 10 can full of matchbooks. We decided to light a couple of matches for fun. Zach, my brother, got burnt and dropped a match, and it fell right in between two boards on our back deck. We kept lighting them and dropping them down under the deck until we smelled smoke. Then we filled my dad's dress shoes with water from the pool to put out the fire. Didn't work. We were 7 and 8 at the time. One summer, same brother and I put up a two-man tent next to the pool. Brother and neighbor kid Andy decide to put the tent in the pool. They get in the tent and zip it up. No big deal, it's the shallow end. Then they start jumping and bouncing the tent towards the deep end. Slowly, bounce after bounce, the water level is rising in the tent that's still zipped up, and they're laughing and enjoying themselves like freaks. They make it to the deep end, and on the last bounce, the tent sinks below the surface. It's now totally submerged and full of water, and they can barely break the surface, jumping to breathe, while still zipped into the tent. They go on swim/flailing and gasping, while the weight of water-filled tent is pulling them under. I can't swim. I didn't know what to do besides scream my head off. Andy's dad heard me over his lawnmower and saved their asses. He pulled the tent into the shallow end and ripped the mesh window, freeing them. It was the summer of '97. I was 10 and they were 9. My mom was sleeping. Okay, last one. My same brother was swinging a metal mop in circles close to the ground around himself like he was a one-arm clock. He did this for over an hour. He got very sweaty, and the dish soap, Palmolive, he used as hair gel was running into his eyes, leaving him disoriented from spinning and blind from soap. He stayed laying in the yard silently until Andy's dad called my dad to come get Zach. He was maybe 10 at the time. Story 11. I've told this story before, but when I was 16, I was going through this emo punk phase, and I decided one day I wanted to put colored streaks in my hair. So I went to Walgreens and bought this semi-permanent red dye for dark hair, because I had no idea how to bleach my hair. I get home, apply the dye, and think I'm going to look so awesome that it'll be worth it if my parents get pissed. I had no idea what I was doing, and instead of ending up with red streaks, thought my hair ended up with a huge red splotch at the top of my head because all the dye clumped together or something. It looked terrible and was no longer worth getting in trouble for. The next morning, I see my mom, and she takes one look at my hair and bursts into laughter and tells me, "Wow, you really effed that up, didn't you?" She wasn't mad. She thought it was hilarious, and after a bit of teasing, she went to Walgreens and got me a box of black hair dye so I could cover it up and not have to go outside looking like that. You know, sometimes the slice of humble pie that you get to eat is punishment enough, so, respect for mom for laughing it off and then helping you move past it quickly. Story 12. In high school, my friends and I were lost, before GPS, at night. We pull over to get our bearings and make a plan. I'm the driver and decide to make a U-turn. There's a 5-foot-long median that I will need to go over. My friend, Kevin, I call him that because of other stories, and I assess the curb from the car, and we're pretty confident that it's a low curb, but there were no streetlights. There are cars starting to come from both directions, so I gun it to make the U-turn before it's too late. As we approach the curb, we both realize the curb is not small. It isn't even medium. It's taller than most and isn't the nicely curved type, but the blocky type. But I'm only about 10 feet away and closing when I noticed. I remembered hearing Kevin say, "Oh no, it's big, it's big." So my instinct is to not stop, but increase my speed. Hopefully the speed will force my car to pop over the curb. The curb was so tall, it scraped the bottom of my bumper. The car did make it up onto the median, but it felt like we hit it hard, and I think I heard the car say ouch. I get my wits about me and zoom out of there before the oncoming traffic gets to me. The car turned out okay, thanks to it being an old, heavy Oldsmobile. Story 13. College dorm mini party. My roommates and I were all engineers, and we decided to make our own drinking game. So we get a deck of cards, and we split the cards between the three of us. Then we go 1, 2, 3, and everybody would slap a card down. The first person to correctly add up the values of all the cards, per blackjack rules, didn't have to drink, but everybody else had to do a shot. If you shouted the wrong number, you had to drink twice, and nobody else did. Basically, you had to try to do math while getting plastered. Oh boy. Things escalated pretty quick. The more drunk people got, the worse they got, and the more double shots they were taking. In engineering terms, it was a positive feedback loop. The next morning, one of my roommates, who was pretty shy and we didn't realize was a lightweight, was found in a giant puddle of puke in the bathroom. We got him up, helped him out of his clothes, and got him into the shower and brought him water, etc. After passing out in the shower for a few hours, we moved him to his bed, where he woke up naked about 10 hours later, having zero memories from the party. Scary crap. Looking back, I realize how serious it could have been for him. Story 14. When I was in college, I was drunk and decided to punch a pint glass off of my bookshelf. I ended up slicing my finger. Bad. I went to the bathroom and ran it under some water, but it just kept bleeding, so I wrapped it up in a towel and tried to go to sleep. Shortly after, I heard a loud knock on my door and went to see who it was. It was campus security. He had followed a trail of blood from the bathroom to my room and wanted to see if everything was okay. I showed him my finger, and after he saw just how bad it was, he told me I needed to go to the hospital. It was like 3 a.m., but he was cool enough to give me a ride there instead of calling an ambulance. I ended up getting a bunch of stitches, and the doctor told me I was incredibly lucky. I was very, very close to slicing a tendon and causing some serious permanent damage to my finger. I now have a scar shaped like the Nike swoosh on my finger to remind me that it is really, really stupid to punch glass. Story 15. The following is a good account of why I should not be left to my own devices any more than necessary, and proof that my wife is 85% of my impulse control. I've been installing a kitchen between Tarau and Te Papa in mighty Waikato, New Zealand, where the house is situated in a horseshoe-like curve of a beautiful, clear, very cold stream, not far at all from the famed Blue Springs where our delicious kiwi blue water is bottled. Around lunchtime, I had finished my install and run out of water. Being a fairly warm autumn day, I was quite thirsty, so I wandered through a gate and down the paddock where the stream was shallow enough for me to refill my bottle with crisp, cool natural water as we can all only dream of having flowing through our own backyard. Naturally, I didn't just fill my bottle and get away to my next job. I had a bit of a wander about and enjoyed the fantastic wee spot I was lucky enough to be working in, when I spotted a deeper pool with a few fish and an overgrown track that looked like it was used by animals, which of course I followed upstream through the blackberries, trying my best not to fall in the stream, since I couldn't see where the edge of the bank was. A few hundred meters upstream, I came across another deep section and spied more trout doing their fish things. Except this time, they looked like a good size. I hadn't ever eaten trout before, and contemplated whether it was possible to even catch them without a line. I had visions of grandeur along the lines of charging like a bear at full noise and coming up victorious with a fish in hand. Any rational person would immediately discard this as a bloody stupid idea and just watch the fish, or simply carry on with their day. But not me, apparently. What could go wrong? I spied a likely-looking tree hanging out over the water, kinda sturdy, if a bit thin for holding my 95 kg frame of pure athletic prowess, with a fairly easy-looking jump to get to where the fish were. Off came my boots and I dangled my feet in to check how cold again, and after deciding it wasn't super bad, I quickly stripped down my boxers and scaled the tree and edged out to a good spot not far behind the fish, maybe 2.5 meters above the surface of the water. If you've ever seen a leopard launch gracefully from a branch down onto unsuspecting prey for the perfect kill, all sinew, muscle, and just general lithe, furry death, I can tell you with no uncertainty that that is the exact opposite of what happened. I steadied myself, picked my spot, and launched at the poor fish with outstretched arms, fully prepared for a clean catch, as can only be seen on television with the magic of special effects. What happened in the harshness of reality is, as I leapt off the tree, the precarious purchase my wet feet had slipped completely and I sprawled out to full stretch, somewhat like a frog that's made a complete hash of its carefully planned leap. This caused me to belly flop quite painfully into the stream that's been around 11 degrees at best, which for those who haven't been in such waters, absolutely bone-numbing cold, winding myself completely while being swept downstream at rapid pace as I attempted to keep my head above water to get some air into my suddenly abused lungs. Not an easy task. I managed to get to a shallow area around 50 meters downstream, and proceeded to cough my lungs out, only to realize that the only way out was through heavy blackberries, and I still needed to get back upstream to where my clothes and boots were safely stashed on the bank with no hope of swimming against the current. Much swearing, and not a few scratches later, I got back to my clothes, threw my boots on, and trudged, dripping and shivering, back to my car to dry off with a towel I had handily kept in the back, while hoping like mad that no other trades had turned up to do any work, as there would likely be questions as to why a thoroughly frozen, drenched bloke with a very pink stomach and looking like a drowned rat was making his way up the hill in his underwear and boots with the rest of his clothes in hand and a nice full water bottle. Possibly the worst part of this is I certainly didn't catch a fish, but they sure as heck got a hell of a fright with my flailing about like an absolute twit who was instantly questioning his decisions to go forward with such an ill thought out plan. They say that in all situations, you should apply the 6 Ps. Proper preparation prevents a piss poor performance. My only preparation was, I see fish, I reckon I can catch that fish, no worries. Had I actually managed to wrangle one of the slippery little suckers, I have no way of storing my bountiful prize aside from in one of my tool bags, which is far less than ideal. I'm still not sure why I'm allowed to make my own decisions. I'm in no uncertain terms absolutely not an apex predator, and about as dangerous as a wombat with a mild case of indigestion whose hunting ability extends as far as inhaling some unsuspecting chocolate biscuits. I may just stick to kitchens for a bit. And this, children, is why you should not do psychedelic drugs and go out for walks, or post on Reddit. Moving on. Story 16. Well, I'm currently on vacation with my family in Colombia. We went to an island off the coast of Nicaragua, but still owned by Colombia, called Providencia last week, and spent several days there enjoying the island vibes. It actually was a good idea for us to rent motor scooters to get around. They're a blast, and being mobile like that on an island makes everything more fun. What seemed like a good idea at the time was cruising around the island Sunday night with no protective gear whatsoever. It was a really comfortable night, and I was in shorts and flip-flops. No shirt, helmet, pants, shoes, or much motorcycle experience. The bikes didn't come with any gear, and I certainly didn't have my own. Even if I did, I wouldn't have worn it because it was really nice out. I imagine at this point you can see where this story is going. I came around a corner fast and found myself coming up very quickly on a speed bump. Everything is very poorly marked, and my immediate reaction was to brake, with the front brake. Braking was a good idea. The thing is, anyone who's ever ridden motorcycles can tell you, the front brake on a curve, no bueno. So here I am, back on the mainland, stuck in a hostel with a broken bone in my foot and plenty of road rash, while my family explores the northern coast of Colombia. The thing is that it could have been so much worse. I'm lucky to be alive, and I know it. That said, road burn is no fun. Story 17. A bit of a long story, but I think it's a good one. TLDR at the bottom. About 6 or 7 years ago, age 25, I was walking to a bar with friends. We were going through one of those classic American suburbs where all the yards are small and the houses are identical boxes. Passing one particular house, I made note of the fact that they had far more solar lights in their backyard than was reasonable. Maybe a 100-foot by 100-foot yard with 40-plus lights scattered around. I would like to preface that after the bar, I was nowhere close to drunk. A couple beers and a solid buzz, could still walk in a straight line and talk without slurring, etc. We had to hop a couple fences on the way back from the bar, the only difficult one being this tall concrete wall around the storage facility that took some work to get over, but we did it without issue. So we make our way to the suburb and the house with all the lights. Being in a comfortably buzzed state, I decided that I needed one of the lights. They had enough. One going missing wasn't going to change anything, right? There's a small fence around the yard, one of those 2 or 3 foot high ones, with about 6 to 8 inches in between each slat. Nothing crazy and easily circumvented. Being buzzed, I decide to brace myself on one of the slats to make sure I can comfortably hop over the fence. Left hand on slat, I hop up. Around the halfway point of the hop, the slat snaps off the frame and I fall straight onto my left arm, with most of the impact around the elbow area. It hurt, but more akin to hitting your funny bone rather than blinding pain. I grab the closest light to me, very easily climb over the gap that's now in the fence, and go about my night. Very quickly, I realized I couldn't extend my left arm any further than about 90 degrees. Basically, think about how C3PO holds his arms, and that was it. We got back to my buddy's house, I iced it and went back to sleep. Come the next morning, the pain kicks in and I still can't extend my arm. About a week later, the swelling goes down and I'm able to get a proper scan to see the damage. Sure enough, the elbow's broken. You know how most drawings of a bone generally have two round balls at each end? I snapped one of those, the capitellum, clean off. It was still intact and it was still floating in the elbow joint. Turns out a significant tendon is attached to that little guy, hence why I couldn't extend my arm. Doctor said I lucked out because it was such a clean break, it was a relatively simple fix. A couple screws and a pin, along with physical therapy for a couple months, and my arm was back in business. Being 25, I lucked into the law wherein I was still covered by my parents' insurance. The bill ended up being around $23K, of which only about $1,000 had to be paid out of pocket. I kept that light up until this year, when my wife suggested it was time to let it go. Story 18. I have a good one. Basic training. Just got done with our first field training exercise. Been out in the training area for 4 days, little sleep, no showers, crap in cat hole, yada yada. Anyway, we have mail call at like 8:30 the night we come in. I get a letter from a girl back home and really wanted to read it that night, but I also wanted to get a hot shower. Here's the conundrum. There's 60 dudes in my bay and lights go out at 9 p.m., meaning we had to be in bed. So, do I read the letter and miss the shower, or get the shower and miss the letter? Me being me, I figure I can do both. So, as soon as we're dismissed, I'm up in the steps, 5 at a time. I'm first in the bay, hit my locker, grab my shower gear, drop all my clothes, and sprint for the showers. Uh-oh, there's a door. Gonna have to slow down to open it. Or I could just do a flying front kick and land on my feet on the other side. Yeah, let's do that. What I didn't count for was that when I jumped up to execute, I was now taller than the doorway. I didn't realize my folly until I was already committed. I scrunched down as small as I could, but it didn't matter. Crack. Next thing I know, my battle buddy is standing over me, puking. Apparently, he was about 5 steps behind me and saw this all play out. When I hit the doorframe, I laid out horizontal midair and knocked the F out. I had enough momentum that when I landed in the locker room, I slid all the way to the back wall, which is where I came to with him puking next to me. I had no clue what his problem was. I sat up and I felt something warm hit my upper lip. I reached up and found blood. I also had a metallic taste in my mouth. I thought, damn it, I hit my head so hard I gave myself a bloody nose. Well, no. I stood up and walked over to the sink and realized why my buddy was puking. I had peeled back a chunk of my scalp from the top of my head, and it was gushing blood profusely. My entire face was coated in bright red blood so thick it looked like someone had poured paint on my head. Whoops. Oh, and that metal taste? Spinal fluid. How neat is that? Needless to say, I didn't shower or get to read my letter that night, and it was only through sheer determination and stupidity that I graduated BCT on time. But that's another story. Story 19. A couple of years ago, I was given a bag of Reese's peanut butter cups, the miniature ones that are individually wrapped in foil. We have a fridge in our garage that's mostly used to hold beer. It's a side-by-side with the freezer on one side. It's not hooked up for water in the ice maker. I thought it would be the most awesome idea ever to dump the bag of Reese's cups into the bin in the freezer for holding loose ice cubes. So that way, when you push the button on the outside of the door, a delicious chilled chocolate and peanut butter treat would be dispensed right into your hand. I dumped the whole bag in and I shut the door, very excited to test it out and proud of my idea. I hit the button for the dispenser and whoosh! All of them came tumbling out onto the floor. Dummy me wasn't thinking how ice cubes get dispensed from there. It's always more than one, and they'd probably be bigger too. I had to scramble and pick them all up off the floor because my dog thought he was going to get some freebie treats. Man, I was really bummed that my idea didn't work out. Story 40. Actually, it happened to me last week. I was at Boy Scout camp, and due to the very little light pollution that state forests provide, the stars were absolutely beautiful that night. Some of the other scouts had gone to take a long exposure shot of the stars and galaxies you could see. I decided to join them, and when I looked up at the sky, it was absolutely stunning. Then, realizing that this beautiful moment happens in every teenage film, where they lie on the ground and look up at the stars, proceed to yell, "This is epic movie bucket list moment." And instead of just lying down slowly and spreading myself out, I took the quickest way I knew possible. I yeeted myself up in the air and spread out all my limbs, snow angel style, and just fell. Only once I was in the air did I realize that I should have braced my head. So yeah, I have a concussion now. But I can say the stars were amazing in that brief moment in which I was in the air, and I have one less item on my bucket list. Also, I'm 6'4", and it was downhill. Story 22. Let relatives move in with us as newlyweds in our newly purchased home. My husband was close to this relative and let him move in. He agreed to pay rent, which included utilities and food. He was there 3 weeks, and then he left one weekend and came back bringing his pregnant wife that he had just eloped with and her son from a previous marriage. We had no knowledge of the girlfriend, who became his wife, or the fact that she was pregnant, much less that she had another child. It lasted another month before we told them rent would go up because they were using more power, water, and groceries. Plus, they would just leave and leave his wife's son without telling us that they were leaving or asking if we could watch him. We asked for $100 more a month and they refused. I was so happy to see them go. The sad part is we just had another nightmare relative have to be kicked out for bringing one of his female friends over and letting her stay there alone while he went only God knows where. Heavily pregnant, I came home from grocery shopping to this chick wearing nothing but a towel in my living room, freshly showered and eating our food and wearing my house shoes. Later, I learned she had also taken our clean clothes out of the washer and threw them on the floor while she washed a load of her and her best friend's clothes. The next day, I was still so angry that I put all of his things, bed, dresser, chest of drawers, clothes, everything, outside and called and told him that if he didn't want it ruined by rain, he better come and get it. We learned our lesson, the hard way. Story 23. My BFF and I were at a party and didn't really know anyone. We went to the bathroom together, as girls do, and spotted a pair of electric hair clippers. This was 2007, and Jackass was huge. Bam Margera was famous for sneaking up on people and clipping a chunk of hair off at the scalp. We looked at each other, said, Bam does it, and we did it to each other. We both had long hair, but we were smart enough to do it underneath by the noses of our necks. We could hear people all night in the bathroom yelling, "Where did this hair come from?" We woke up the next morning, hella hungover, and forgot what we had done. I went to put my hair up in a ponytail, and I touched the shaved part and screamed at the top of my lungs. It all came flashing back, and as I reached for my cell phone to call her, she was calling me, and I answered to her hysterically screaming, "What did we do last night?" After that, we adopted the phrase, "It seemed like a good idea at the time," whenever we had other brilliant drink ideas. Fun times. Well, hair can grow back, so, this is only a temporary setback. It could be so much worse. Like, at least you didn't get a crazy tattoo or something like that that's pretty much irreversible. But yeah, I see your point there. Story 24. When I was 14, I did mushrooms with my friend. We both took 1/8. We were having a really good trip downtown and everything was fine. We were having such a good time that we decided we could go back to our dealer and get some acid. We each took a hit of acid, which is not that much, but we had already taken a lot of mushrooms. Now, acid takes maybe an hour to kick in, so when we left there, we ran into a friend of mine who asked if we wanted to smoke a joint. We were there smoking the joint and everything was fine up until the moment where my friend with the weed left us and all of a sudden, the world imploded on itself. I was in an area that I know very well, but everything started to look different. I had no idea where I was. My friend started having the same bad trip, so we went into an alleyway and sat in a doorway to try to calm down. My friend was sitting on my jacket and she was staring at the chain link fence in front of us, saying that there were dogs barking and they were going to attack us. I looked over there, but there was nothing there. But I wasn't sure if maybe there was something and I just wasn't seeing it, so I started getting scared. I wanted to get out of there, so I turned to my friend to ask her to get off my jacket so I can get it back because I want to leave. But when I looked at her face, she was having a seizure. Her eyes were rolled back in her head and she looks like Reagan on the Exorcist movie. I tried to pull my jacket from under her, but she was too heavy, so I left her there in the alley. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but honestly, in the days after, I thought she was dead because I couldn't get a hold of her. This was before cell phones were a thing, so I started on my trek home. I tried to look at the street signs to navigate my way to the house, but everything looked so weird and different. I was having trouble knowing which way to go when I was really only half an hour walk away from my house. I had no perception of how much time passed. I finally found the road I was supposed to be on and just kept walking straight. I had to stop at every street corner to check the signs again because I was so confused. I didn't even know my name at this point. I walked across a bridge and a man on a bike stopped and started talking to me. He asked if I had done crack that night, and I said no, and then he asked if I wanted to go with him to his house. I cried, "No, I just want to go home." He looked at me and said, "Yeah, I think that's a good idea." I think he realized that I was very young and probably just took too much drugs. So when I got home, I honestly thought that I was outside all night long and thought that it was probably around 4 in the morning and that everyone would be asleep. Nope. My brother was awake doing homework, and it was probably only 10 p.m. It had only been a few at the most. At this point, when I took my shoes off at the door, I realized I was bleeding badly from my leg, and I have no idea how that happened. My pants were soaked with blood. My brother took one look at me and said, "Go clean yourself up and go to bed." So I went in the bathroom and tried to wash off my leg, but everything looked so weird. I can just imagine what I looked like, just kind of staring at the blood coming out of my leg and sitting on the floor of the bathroom, just effed out of my mind. My brother kept looking at me very strange. He's never done drugs in his life. I was the wild child. Anyways, I went to bed and laid there for about 6 hours, just staring at my ceiling, wanting it to end. So, if you think mixing acid and mushrooms seems like a good idea at the time, just remember the story and think again. Story 25. This is a true story. I stink bombed my 7th grade bathroom. It was so goddamn wretched and awful smelling that the following proceeds to occur, in this order. Everyone in the entire wing of the school smells it immediately. It spread fast and it was potent. Way more potent than I ever imagined it would be, having only ever tried it once before, outside. It smelled like rotten eggs mixed with dumped gray water, full-bodied with a hint of sewage on the tongue. Teachers investigate. Janitors are called, then plumbers, thinking it's a gas leak or something wrong with the sewage/septic. Several students begin vomiting as the smell permeates the classrooms. Some teachers are feeling queasy, unable to properly manage the chaos of the panicked children. One teacher vomits. There are now several piles of vomit in the hallway. People are seriously freaking out now, and announcements are made to keep doors closed and stuff whiteboard rags under the doors in an attempt to keep the smell out. It doesn't seem to do much, for the odor has now taken on a life of its own. Shortly thereafter, the entire school is evacuated like it's a fire drill. I hear fire engines and several fire trucks pull up, and the entire school watches as firefighters run in with all of their gear on, presumably thinking it's a gas leak and our school is about to explode or something equally catastrophic. About half an hour goes by, and then several other police vehicles arrive with lights on. Police SUVs, unmarked cars with police lights, an ambulance, and a sort of box truck, possibly with utility lights. I don't remember exactly the kind of vehicle this was, as this was 15 plus years ago. Out of the box steps a team of people with effing hazmat suits on, led by 2 K9 units, bomb dogs maybe, whose handlers had what looked like respirators on. The firefighters emerge from the school, more or less shrugging, and in go the hazmat with K9s leading. At this point, myself and one other kid on my morning bus route were the only ones who knew about the stink bomb. Let's call him BM, for Big Mouth. I'm on the verge of crapping my pants in fear and trying to keep from crying from laughter at the same time, while gravely fearing the anxiety I'm seeing wash over BM's entire state of being as he sees emergency responders enter the building. He avoids eye contact when he notices me looking at him, and slowly ducks behind his line of students. We were in different classes. Creeps over to her teacher and whispers in her ear. A murderous scowl crosses her face, as she then approaches the principal and assistant principal and proceeds to talk in hushed tones. The amount of anger and outrage that I now see between them is ineffable. They're downright furious. Principal then makes a call on her radio. Within the next hour, all of the vehicles and costumed danger men leave. Students and teachers are back in class, and the prodigal bathroom is haphazardly taped off with caution tape. The bathroom is now torn apart in some places, with flooring removed, toilets unseated, and wall sections ripped out to expose the piping, and apparently all that needed to be done was a quick hosing down by the janitorial staff to rid the bathroom of the foul substance. There remains a lingering hint of the noxious scent that will proceed to haunt those hallways for the next several weeks. A day or two later, I'm called into the principal's office. I'm grilled for a solid few hours with my parents present, but I never said I did it. I'm sure it was written all over 12-year-old me's face, though. Plus, my disciplinary record didn't help, because of course I did it. I was the only troublemaker there. My parents were both pissed and confused. My mom covered for me because she remembers when she bought me the stink bombs, and she knew the gravity of the situation, given the insanity of the events that unfolded. BM was the only confirmation of my guilty verdict, and I was sentenced to out-of-school suspension, OSS, for 1 week and in-school suspension, ISS, for 2 weeks following for committing, quote, terroristic acts, according to the sensationalism of the white, blonde, wealthy principal. So I played video games for a week and got to draw all day for the following 2 because the ISS lady liked me. Naturally, BM and I were no longer buds, and we didn't talk after that. I never effed with stink bombs again. Story 26. I was working for a tree company that cut down and trimmed trees under big transmission power lines. One day, we came across a tree at the east side of a small valley that was perfectly balanced and had fences running under it 3 ways. In order to get this tree to fall how we wanted, we had to put a rope in it. We then ran the rope, it was a very long rope, through the valley and a small copse of trees, up the other side of the valley into the west side, and a truck that was going to pull on the rope. Just before they cut the tree, my buddy said we should grab all the rope and fly up into the air. So we did, but just before the tree fell, everyone but me chickened out and let go of the rope. All of a sudden, the rope leaps into the air and I'm instantly propelled upward. When I'm about 10 feet in the air, the rope snagged on one of the trees at the bottom of the valley and popped. When the wave of the pop hit my hands, I couldn't hang on. I was still traveling upwards and probably topped out at 15 feet in the air. I fell hard on one foot while my body was sideways. I looked up and the rope was probably 75 to 100 feet in the air. If it hadn't snagged on that tree, I most likely would have been hurt really super bad or possibly killed. As it was, I walked slowly away with a slightly sprained ankle. Thank the patron saint of not letting bad things happen to stupid people. Story 27. One time when I was 13 years old, I was swimming in a pool and I had to fart. I wondered what it would be like if the fart bubble went in my mouth, so I did the unthinkable. I did a flip inside the pool while expelling the gas from my rectum at the same time. I opened my mouth and the fart bubble made its way into my mouth. Direct hit. That's when I realized that I had made a huge mistake. It immediately tasted like someone had just injected 3-day-old moldy diarrhea next to an open sewer grate in the middle of an Indian restaurant right into my mouth and sinuses. The taste was horrible enough to make me surface and get out of the pool. As I'm walking around, no matter how hard I tried, the taste of my own super concentrated ass blast going into my mouth would not go away. My father noticed me hacking and wheezing. He approached me and asked, "Hey son, is everything all right?" I was barely able to tell him, "No, help," through the nausea I was feeling. I was within standard conversation distance of his face when I was talking to him, so he was able to smell my breath. After smelling my breath, he said, "Oh God, boy, your breath smells like crap." After that, I made my way to some bushes and proceeded to vomit. It was like that one puking scene from the movie Team America: World Police. Seriously, that bad. After I got done vomiting, I made my way into my father's apartment so I could brush my teeth to get rid of the fart and puke taste that was now in my mouth. After what seemed like half an hour of constantly brushing my teeth, the taste of vomit and crap had finally left my mouth enough to where I quit dry heaving. The moral of the story is, don't swallow your own fart bubbles. It's bad for your health. You know, if not for this story and that admonition at the end, I don't think I ever would have thought that was a bad idea. Being sarcastic, of course. Moving on. Story 28. When I was 12-ish, I had a cousin who was 17-ish come over for the holidays. He ended up having to babysit me and my brothers. To fight off boredom, he suggested, "Hey guys, want to see what happens when you set one of your green army guys on fire?" Hell yeah. So he went and set up in our backyard with a plate and a lighter, set them up in the middle of the patio, and began to slowly melt our toy soldier. This was the most profound thing we'd ever seen, just watching the plastic toy slump over into a puddle on the plate. After a month or so goes by, me and my younger brother were home alone with nothing to do, so I got the bright idea to melt another green soldier, but this time with him up against our wooden fence. In the corner of our backyard, my imagination had him fighting a war, when all of a sudden, bam! OMG, a flamethrower! Now, in my backyard, our fence and the neighbor's fences didn't connect, which left a gap opening we used as our secret hideout spot. This was covered in tall, dry grass. This same grass was poking through the fence, right above where my green army guy was fighting for his life against a flamethrower. After watching him curl over into a puddle, I happened to notice that the grass and fence was also on fire. So in my mind, I should put it out by blowing on it, which ended up being the worst idea as the fire spread and slowly traveled to the neighbors' backyards. Oh no. I thought when I ran inside to grab a cup of water from the kitchen to attempt to put out the fire. My younger brother came to my aid after seeing me run in and out the kitchen several times with his cup, but the flames were out of control by that point. Cups not helping, I finally grabbed the water hose and sat on top of our fence and just sprayed the whole area, finally able to put out the fire in everyone's yard. After the whole ordeal, my brother started crying and I had to calm him down while also convincing him not to tell anyone. About a week later, after telling our parents how we heroically saved everyone's homes from some hooligans hiding in our secret spot, smoking cigarettes and dropping their butts, which started the fire, me and my brother get into an argument. So he attempted to blackmail me for the whole incident. I called his bluff and he ended up ratting me out, which got me grounded for a month. Sorry for any typos and errors. Typed too many words to go back and double check my story. Story 29. Having an authentic Viking funeral for a cat. My brother and sister-in-law were adopted by a big orange stray cat. His name was Petey the Pirate, so named because he had the arg all the time. He was riddled with medical issues, and scurvy could well have been among them. No teeth, missing half an ear, he had some allergy to something outside. One of his eyes was always matted shut with green stuff, and he wheezed constantly, making up stories about how Petey got his battle scars, teeth knocked out while saving Chuck Norris from a bar fight, lost his ear trashing a hotel room during his stint as the bassist for Journey, etc., was one of our favorite drunken hobbies. Petey was a legend, so when his time came, we felt like he deserved an epic send-off. A friend of ours, and Petey's, had a farm with a large pond that he offered up for the ceremony. My brother spent over a week crafting a bow, arrows, and a raft he doused in flammable liquid. He wasn't particularly sentimental about the cat, but he was just dedicated to the joke. All arrangements were made, invitations sent, and we met up at the pond to lay Petey to rest in the most glorious, fiery, and admittedly redneck way we could think of. There was beer, and most definitely there was Free Bird blasting from the tiny Bluetooth speaker one of us happened to have in our car. Problem number 1. My brother spent over a week making the woodcrafts. This meant that the dead cat had to be stored somewhere safe from scavengers for 10 days. Problem number 2. My brother is an idiot. He wrapped Petey's body in a sheet and put it in a plastic tote. Said tote was sealed to keep other animals from getting into it and eating the carcass, thus spreading the zombie pirate cat plague. This would have been mildly okay, but this was in the summer in the southeastern United States. My brother set the tote outside on his deck in the heat for 10 days. When we opened the tote, the stench of death hit us like that scene in Indiana Jones where they open the Ark of the Covenant. Problem number 3. My brother's woodworking skills were amateur at best. His handmade arrows were anything but straight. The raft was rickety and the bow was sketchy. We put Petey on the raft and it fell apart. Pieces of it held together enough to drape the non-Newtonian cat body over long enough to get the job done. Problem number 4. My brother's archery skills are amateur at best. His first 2 shots landed almost directly in front of his feet. The bow simply wasn't capable of any kind of distance. Problem number 5. My brother is overconfident. He only made 3 arrows, thinking he couldn't possibly need more than that. He couldn't get them to stay lit long enough to aim and make a successful shot. He decided that the best course of action was to douse the cat and light it with a match. Nobody had a match, only pocket lighters. By this time, the raft had drifted far enough out that he would have to get into the water to reach it. Captain Fossil Fuel decided to carry the gas can out into the water and pour it directly on Petey. He neglected to anticipate the gasoline flowing on top of the water he was standing in. He lit the raft and there was a whoosh of fire that suddenly surrounded him. To get out, he had to dive under the water and swim. The greenish-brown water that was infested with mosquitoes, tree frog eggs, potentially water snakes, and who knows what else. Luckily, at the end of the day, there were no burn injuries and no antibiotics required. Petey the Pirate floated off to Valhalla in a blaze of glory, and we celebrated his life as we thought he would have wanted. Bad decisions usually make for good stories. Story 30. Probably a bit late for this, but my friends and I grew up in a town surrounded by woods, with a creek cutting the area in half. We'd utilize fallen trees and debris to build bridges so that we could cross. The water smelled like crap, and you didn't want to accidentally take a dunk. This creek was at the bottom of a hill, and during storms it would flood a little. One year, we had a huge flood. It looked more like a lake than a creek. Our about 15-year-old selves decided this was the day. We were going to take my grandpa's Little John boat and finally ride the creek. We had talked about it before, but the creek was never deep enough to pull it off. But now it was a raging whitewater river, and we figured it was our best chance. I think about 6 of us got into this small boat that had never held more than just my grandpa and me before, and all the little holes and cracks in the old girl finally showed themselves, and we were taking in water. No big deal though. Aaron over there has a water bottle, he'll bail. Ryan and S have oars, so they'll steer. We're good, right? A puts his oar in the water, and the current rips it out of his hands. I later find out that set of oars was owned by my grandpa for 25 plus years and he loved them. So, okay, we got one oar, a water bailer, and 4 other guys to help guide that boat and push it off hills, rocks, and whatever, right? We forgot about all the bridges we made to cross this creek. We came into 3 of them. Each time, we'd be having to each jump out of the boat, go across the bridge, and hop back in. Otherwise, the low height of the bridges would have seriously messed our heads up. The one kid who was too afraid to get on was running beside us, laughing his ass off. We were getting scared, but there wasn't much we could do with one oar in raging waters. At one point, a spider the size of my hand landed on our water bailer's head. The guy sitting next to me smacked it off his head. He gave us one of those, "What the F, guys?" But we didn't tell him. We were getting more concerned about our success at this point. What seemed like fun started to seem like a truly dangerous situation. To this day, 10 years later, Aaron has no idea what landed on his head. We decided he never needs to know. But now the waters are too rough. Aaron's water bottle isn't big enough to hold back the water seeping in, and we're at a point in the woods that we don't recognize too much anymore. We've already lost the guy who was following us from the shore, no idea where he is. Suddenly, though, a rope hanging from a tree just a few feet away from us. The oldest and strongest guy out of us all reaches and manages to grab it, locking his feet under the seat with a boat to bring the boat to a stop. We quickly decided which one of us were jumping in the water and pulling the boat to the shore, probably about 20 feet away. The water wasn't too deep, probably just 4 feet, but it was still a female dog. Clothes and shoes were destroyed. We cursed every little bush or sapling we ran into. But we got the boat ashore at an elementary school probably about a mile down the street from my house. We flipped it over and carried it over our heads down the street to my house. We bonded a lot during that walk, and I don't think I ever felt closer with him than at that time, even though we knew each other since pre-K. It turned into an utter crap show, but we worked together and managed to pull it off, despite the loss of one oar that my grandpa still has no idea what happened to. I still don't talk to those guys anymore, as life always moves on, but damn, we threw caution to the wind that afternoon and lived. Story 31. Boy, oh boy. One day I was walking around my town square and I had to pee, really badly. I was right next to the courthouse and a bunch of lawyers' offices and stuff, and 12 was hot in the area, so I didn't want to just go in the open. So I decided to go to the courthouse because I didn't want to walk all the way over to the nearest gas station and wait for the crosswalk and all that jazz. I walk in and ask if I can use the restroom. Sure, just empty your pockets in the bin and go through the metal detector. I go and take off my belt, go through my pockets and toss my wallet in the bin. Then my phone, my keys, my lighter, my eye drops, and a bag of Skittles that I was eating, or so I thought. I had lost a gram a couple days ago, and guess what? Found it. So did the officer. He picked it up and went, "Are you effing kidding me? Did you really? Okay, come here," and handcuffs me. In hindsight, I maybe should have taken it a little more serious, but holy crap, I just could not stop laughing. The officers got annoyed with me because they thought I was being contemptuous, but I just said, look, man, you could either arrest a kid that's crying and sobbing over something so dumb, or you could arrest a kid that can laugh at the same thing you're gonna laugh about in 30 minutes after you're done with me. Which would you prefer? And they just chuckled. When I was being processed, they called another officer to take me to the jailhouse, and he looked at the baggie and said, "Huh, you got arrested over some crappy weed anyways. Don't worry though, this is such a small amount that you should be fine. A year of probation and it should be off your record," and proceeded to explain conditional discharge to me. He also talked to me about being on the county's drug task force for years and that he's busted whole local cartels and found pounds of weed in people's cars before. We had a good chat about his work in the past, and he helped calm me down and honestly was really sweet about it. TLDR, thought it would be a good idea to pee in the courthouse. Proceeded to find a bag of weed I thought I had lost. Story 32. Oh boy, have I got a relatively light story for this one. So, I was 18 at my first real party with my roommates at our place. We were getting kicked out and just said, F it, let's spend what was supposed to be rent. And one of them calls over some people we knew from high school. One of them is this chick I knew from my older cousin. Used to be that type that I was absolutely infatuated with, but by this point she was pretty unattractive. Well, she brings a fifth, I think. It's that size, a little bigger than a 2-liter. A fireball, and immediately challenges everyone to shot for shot. I immediately sprang into action and just got effing wild. 11 double shots in and she taps out, but there were 2 doubles left, so I finished them off. After about 5 minutes, I decide it's nap time, but I didn't want to go to bed, so I find the most uncomfortable place to sleep. I wander around a bit and decide to pass out in my roommate's buddy's truck bed. Well, according to them, I was out for longer than the 15 minutes I thought I was out for, because I woke up to them panicking and searching frantically for me, almost going so far as to call the cops. I lean up and tell them to shut the hell up, I want a nap, and they all start yelling at me to get out of the truck and go inside. I refuse, so they all go in, except for my roommate. This stupid mother effer decided to wait for me to go back to sleep, then entered marine mode and jumped into the truck and proceeded to give me the Heimlich in an attempt to get me out of the truck. Needless to say, some projectile vomiting later, I was back inside and trying to get more alcohol before sneaking back out and somehow getting into and passing out in the locked cabin of the same truck. Story 33. I was having a very bad day, full of exams and general college exhaustion. After my night class finished up, I started driving home and just felt like I needed a good long cry. I pulled into a public park a few miles from my house so that I could blast some sad songs without waking the neighbors. I did not, however, realize that it was 11 p.m. and public parks close at dusk. Police officer pulled into the park, saw me, and came knocking on my window to see what I was up to. It went something like this. P.O. What you doing? The park is closed. Is everything okay? Me, mascara streaked all over my face. I had a bad day and just wanted to cry in my car for a while. P.O. I'm sorry, I do understand, but I already ran your plates and you only live a few minutes away. Please collect yourself and head home now. He left and I continued to sit there, now crying harder because I was so embarrassed about admitting that I was sitting in my car crying, and also because 18-year-old me thought I had just gotten pulled over. It occurred to me later on that most cars were sitting in a pitch-black public park at 11 p.m. are probably waiting on a drug deal or something. I've since learned that when I need to cry in my car, I should stay parked in the university parking lot with all the other students who cry in their cars. Absolutely. Misery loves company, right? So what better way to get over this than to go to like a public parking lot where everybody is crying in their cars and we can all just hurt together. Story 34. Last summer, I went to my friend's grandparents' house on the bay. They had huge rope swings, slides, and even a zip line. We had been drinking most of the night, so our dumbasses thought it would be a good idea to go skinny dipping. After a little bit, some of the people were like, let's rope swing. It was really high up, and I hate heights. I also had a bad feeling, so I didn't want to do it. They eventually talked me into it, and I did it with my friend. I felt the pain before I even hit the water. I think I was holding the rope wrong, and the force of me coming down broke my fingers. When I got out of the water, my finger at the top knuckle was sideways. I grabbed it and tried to make it go back straight, and it didn't hurt at that point, but I felt it click when I moved it. That's when the pain started. I tried to hide it because I was embarrassed, but eventually the pain got so bad I was struggling to breathe and not cry. My friend is pre-med, so I got him to look at my finger. He said we needed to go to the hospital. I laid on the dock and cried for a minute with an E and U draped all over me before getting the courage to put my shirt on. We get to the hospital and they tell me I broke my middle finger. When I went to the doctor the next day, they said I actually broke my middle finger and ring finger. The break was bad enough that I ended up having surgery. I have a bunch of super gross pictures of it. I was very sad about leaving the Never Broken a Bone Reddit page. Story 35. One time when I was 15, I snuck out of the house to drive to my boyfriend's house. He had a bunch of our friends over because his mom was out of town. When I walked into the house, no one was downstairs, but I could hear the buzzing of what sounded like hair clippers from upstairs. I followed the sound to my boyfriend's room, where I found him surrounded by 4 of his friends, shaving off a girl's eyebrow who was passed out on his bed. I was like, what the F are you doing? He said her nose had started bleeding, because she's a dumb cokehead, all over his mom's sink, so as retribution, he was shaving off her eyebrows after she passed out. The first idea that seemed good at the time was stopping him at one brow. When I saw her a couple days later, it was clear I should have let him finish. Then, just as I had convinced him to stop, her nose started bleeding again. Bzzz, go the clippers as he goes after the second brow. The second idea that seemed good at the time was swooping her up over one shoulder and leading her brows downstairs to safety. As she was very drunk and only partially conscious, this was no small feat. His stairs were the kind that go down about 5 steps, then make a left turn and continue another 5 or so steps. There were no shoes allowed in his house, so I'm leading her down these stairs barefoot, and when I get halfway down the first flight, I step on an upside-down bottle cap. Of course, it's the foot that's bearing all her weight, and my leg just crumples. No muscles to speak of. As my leg gives way, I drop her down the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. She hits the wall, and I think, oh, thank God, it will stop her. Nope. She slumps over to her left, still half conscious, and then proceeds to go ass over tea kettle down the rest of the stairs. I'm trying not to laugh, but it's hard, especially when I see her splayed out at the bottom of the stairs, blood from her nose smeared across her face, as she goes, "Why did you do that?" with only one eyebrow. Story 36. I hung out with a girl a few times and she seemed great. I found it a little weird that she had me meet her parents after only knowing her for a few days, but I shrugged it off because I was very attracted to her. One night we went out to get some food, and while we were there talking, I started to feel like my panic sensors were tingling. On paper, things were fine. We were having a relatively normal conversation, but I couldn't help but be blinded by red flags. She came off as very controlling, and it seemed like she was ready to dive headfirst into a relationship while I was still trying to figure her out. I was working with a friend in IT at the time, so I went to the bathroom and texted him something along the lines of, "I need to get out of the state right now. Call me with a fake emergency about client's computer, something ASAP." And he did just that. My acting skills were on point, or so I thought. "I have to go take care of this right now, and I'm so sorry." I left. Not even an hour later, I met up with my brother and told him what happened. And as we were walking in the downtown part of our town, we run into her and her whole family. I didn't even see her coming. I just looked up and there she was, siblings and both parents beside her. It was horribly awkward and she basically caught me lying. I felt somewhat guilty but moved on quickly. Some poor soul got her pregnant 6 months later and now they're living together. Story 37. One time I was suffering major depression. I decided to pretend I was my brother, which I don't even have, saying that I got shot by my parents on my Discord server. I wanted to bring out the true feelings of the people I cared about, because I don't know how much they really did care about me, but it backfired. Only about 20% of the people actually believed the rubbish I said. Then I showed an image from Google and said it was my heart rate, but then someone proved it was fake by searching the image on Google and bam, I got busted. Then I attempted to tell another lie, saying that I still was my brother, but I was on vacation and he needed entertainment. Still, almost nobody believed me, and I decided to come clean with a message that said, "All right, fine. The truth is, I've been lying to you all this whole time. Hell, I don't even have a brother. It's just that nobody really cares about me. They want me to die. I don't even know why. That's why I do this, to get attention. I don't want to be alone in this world, so woohoo, you caught me. Are you happy? I hope you are." Then everyone stated that they really did care about me, and that I didn't have to cause all that drama to get attention. They even told me I needed mental help, which I got soon afterwards. Yet, I didn't lose any friends at all. As depressing as this message may sound, it's true. Story 38. Living in the effing boondocks. I live on a 100-acre, used-to-be cattle farm. We don't have any more cattle, but last summer we had a big turkey vulture problem. Turkey vultures are mean mother effers. These craps would stalk anything, and I swear to God had a fight club in our yard. Well, the worst idea was letting my pops convince me shooting one with a paintball gun would be a good way to assert my dominance and get it to go away. These female dogs are the terminators of birds. Paintballs do nothing to them. So one day, they're literally in a circle in my yard having their effing vulture fight club meeting when I peg one of the biggest ones with a neon green paintball. They all fly away. I think everything is great, right? Cue narrator overhead saying everything was, in fact, very wrong. Those craps circled my car 2 days later, screaming and pecking the ground, and would try and buck up to me instead of flying away when I got near the door. Eventually, I got scared and ran back inside and called my dad crying, and he had to come home from work and actually shoot a real gun in their direction. An important detail is turkey vultures are federally protected birds, which made me cry more because I didn't want any of them to get hurt for real, even though I did shoot a paintball at their leader. Story 40. My first experience drinking alcohol. I was a sophomore in high school, so about 15 to 16. It was the prom night after party, which I got invited to by my friend's older sister. So we go, and it looked just like the movies. You had a group of stoners smoking in the backyard, the jocks playing super aggro beer pong, and then me. So you head over to grab what I think is a drink. I crap you not. There was a folding table just layered with alcohol. It looked like a shelf from the liquor store. Whiskey, tequila, scotch, even wine. What kind of teenager drinks wine? So I grab a cup and just start pouring it all. I had seen movies and thought that's what bartenders did, just mix crap together. Boy, was I wrong. Less than an hour later, I was in another world. My body was drenched in sweat, and I was projectile vomiting outside the window of a Dodge Charger. The people I was with at the time thought it'd be a good idea to just leave me at the closest park to my house. I woke up the next day at 6 a.m., covered in vomit, sweat, and sprinkler water. It was the first and only time I've ever blacked out, but not the only time I projectile vomited. Story 41. I was about 13 or 14 at the time. It was summer, so I was home alone with my little sister, 7 or 8, while my mom was at work. I was on the back patio doing something. I had a big coffee tin, basically a small bucket, that had about an inch of gasoline in it to clean off the brushes. I thought I'd remembered hearing somewhere that liquid gasoline won't burn, only the vapors. What a great experiment. Got a match, lit it, and tossed it in. Didn't think about the fact that the 5 to 6 inches of empty space in the tin above the gasoline was full of vapors. Whoosh! I now have basically a bucket of fire, and oh crap, Mom will be home in like half an hour. This will never burn out in time. I know, if it's only the top layer burning, it's going to take forever. But if I were to give the top more surface area, spread it out, it'll burn off faster. So I tip over the bucket. Yep, more surface area now, because the fire has effing spread across the entire patio, right next to the house walls. Thankfully, there was a water hose nearby. I was able to grab it and eventually get everything extinguished with no damage, and still a few minutes to spare before Mom gets home. Except, how do I explain why the entire patio and back wall is wet? Thinking quickly, I grab a soapy washcloth and start cleaning glass. The majority of the rear wall was sliding glass doors. Mom gets home, I'm about halfway through cleaning all the glass. I told her I'd just noticed how dirty they were. They really were. And it was bugging me, so I decided to clean them. I don't think she wholly bought it, but she had no evidence otherwise and let it slide. Story 42. One time, my friends and I lit a fire at a place we used to ride dirt bikes at and whatnot. We called it the Pit. It was a lawless place for us as kids growing up, so we could basically do everything and anything out there. One time, we lit a cattail on fire. For those who don't know, this is a plant that grows very tall and has cotton-like fibers. We left and turned around to go back to riding our bikes, and we had started a small forest fire. It spread so fast that we couldn't put it out whatsoever. We all grabbed buckets of water, cups, and tried to douse the flames with our jackets. We eventually had to just leave because we were scared. It was so far into the woods we couldn't really call anyone for help. We drove out the next day to what looked like an asteroid hitting Earth. The ground was all black, trees were black, and it was pretty bad. Luckily, we got together and replanted about 400 trees and plants, and today it's actually a park with lush vegetation, so we occasionally have a laugh about it. Story 43. I have a crap ton of stories. Here's just one. It happened when I was about 15 or so. I lived in a home that was within walking distance of 3 winter ski resorts and a short hop or 2 more, and a car ride to 3 more. 4 were lined up just so that I could start in one, ski to the next, ski home, eat lunch, ski through another, and end up in the 4th. However, to do so meant having to ski out of bounds for all of them. For a kid who lived there year-round, no big deal. I knew the terrain well enough to avoid problems. One year, I was skiing with 2 friends and we decided to go back to my house for a night of video games. So we stayed until just before the lift shut down and snuck out of bounds on the way home. Normally, if the moons and stars are out, the snow tends to have a sort of luminescent quality. Even when you're among the trees, you can generally see well enough to navigate. Unfortunately, that night it was a little too cloudy and the moon and stars weren't bright enough, so we just kinda dead reckoned it as we all made the trip before, during daytime. Maybe we were skiing a bit faster than we normally would. Maybe the snow was a little denser as we weren't skiing through powder. Maybe I misread the tree arrangement and lost track of exactly where we were. In any case, I came out of the trees a little sooner than I expected and a little faster than I would have liked. Just before you reach my house, there's a 60 or 70 foot almost vertical drop down to the flats. This kind of drop is not anything we couldn't handle. We all routinely competed, giant slalom for the speed, and spent a lot of time skiing the Palisades at resorts that had them. What was new was the speed I hit the drop and the lack of light. I was airborne and the landing wasn't going to be good. I twisted my body to try and stick to the mountain, but only succeeded in bouncing off a mogul I formed from my earlier adventures. Instinctively, I just went ragdoll and went straight down to the flat, right onto hard, packed snow. It hurt like hell. I was competing earlier in the day, so I still had my helmet on, but my head still throbbed from the impact. I'm not sure how long I lay there, but I eventually inventoried my bones and found none broken. My equipment were all still whole, undamaged, and attached. My friend just behind me saw me disappear and put on the brakes just enough that when he hit the drop, he managed to stick the landing on a mogul but lost one of his skis in both poles. He was still more than 20 feet up on a near vertical face. He was the least experienced of the group and scared crapless with just one ski. Friend number 3 was still at the top, calling down to both of us to see if we were alive. He was freaking out, thinking I died. Yep, good idea, gone bad. Story 44. I've said this one before, but it's one of my favorites, so let's go. I want to tell you about the time I lost my virginity. In high school, I was a virgin, and my girlfriend and I hadn't had sex yet. We started talking about doing the deed, and my parents were out of town the following weekend. I made a playlist, read some books, and in my 14-year-old hormones was ready to go to town for the 2 or 3 minutes I was physiologically allowed. The day comes, and her and I go to a local restaurant beforehand to have some dinner. You know, get all fancy with it. My house had a large front double door and a back sliding glass door. The front door had one of those storm locks that you can't unlock from the outside. When we left for dinner beforehand, we left from the backyard, locking the sliding glass door behind us. That's when it hit me. I hadn't unlocked the storm lock. We were locked out completely. My horniness quickly turned to confused desperation. We tried to find a way to get through the front double doors. This storm lock could be unlocked if you slipped a credit card through the middle of the double door and unlatched the lock. However, there was a wooden strip on the outside of the door that covered up the crack between the doors. That's when I had the worst and, at the time, the best idea I've ever had. I'm going to saw through the strip and remove it. I go back to the backyard, grab a handsaw, and start sawing through part of the front door. My determination in this moment lasted all of 11 seconds, at which point I quickly realized that this is the effing stupidest idea I've ever concocted. However, 11 seconds is just long enough to do some serious cosmetic damage to a wooden door. We freaked out, caved in, and called my parents, who had a family friend come by and jimmy the bedroom window. I have a whole lot of seediness in my family. He saw both of us, saw us dressed up in only the way 2 horny kids could. He climbed through the bedroom window and saw all the candles, and he knew what was up. We ended up having deeply unsatisfying first-time sex. Later, she used some paint to fill in and paint up the door damage, and they never seemed to notice. Story 45. Me at the tender age of I'm vincible, translated to mean 10 years old, was out playing with a group of friends. Earlier that day, one of my friends found a shopping cart. At that time, we lived at the bottom of a huge hill, so someone gets a great idea. I dare you to go down the hill in the shopping cart. I'm thinking, crap, I'll probably die. So I said okay, but only half the hill, because I never back down from a dare. So I get into the shopping cart and I say, don't push it, just let it go. My friends, being the jerks they were, pushed the cart so hard, and for a moment, it was pure exciting fun until the cart hits a pothole and I go flying out of the cart. I land on my forearms, and I swear to this day I left all my skin on the pavement and had only bones for forearms. I'm crying, but panic sets in because I knew my mom would spank me. So I quickly pull my sleeves down, go in the house quietly so my mom wouldn't hear me, slowly creep up the stairs, and go to the bathroom. By that time, my shirt sleeves are bloody, so I spend the next hour picking rocks and dirt out of my arms, clean them up, and put band-aids on them. I think I used every band-aid in the box. A whole week went by without my mom noticing until she sees the scabs and asks, "What happened to you?" I said coolly, "I tripped outside the other day, but I'm okay." My mom says, "I swear, you're such a klutz." I look at her and smirk, "Yeah, I am." She still, to this day, doesn't know about my reckless daredevil behavior. Story 46. My friend was house sitting at her boyfriend's parents' house at Matsu Valley in Alaska. They had a nice house tucked in the woods, about a 5-hour drive from our home. No big deal. In Alaska, long drives are kinda a given part of life. My husband and I made the drive, plenty of party in tow, and met up with our friend and her BF at his folks' house where we had the place to ourselves. We met about half a dozen of their friends who were all new to us. Now, this was a long time ago, nearly 20 years. I've never been much of a drinker, more of a smoker, but this evening I did partake. I was half-cocked, we all were, and went outside to go run amok. The parents had 2 horses in a great big fenced area. My friend, she convinces me the one horse barely even moves, and I should totally go sit on it. Sure, lol. Sounds like a great idea, right? No. I don't know the first thing about horses, but I was feeling froggy enough to think it was a good idea. No cell phones back in those days, not as the norm, so no pics or videos. Anyway, I hustle my ass out there and somehow do this spider monkey move onto this supposedly stationary horse's back. I know how dumb a stationary horse sounds now, lol. And this mother effer takes off on a full gallop, or canter, whichever is faster. It runs in this mucky, snowy, icy field. I wrapped myself around its neck and hung on for dear life. I tried to scream the entire time, but no noise came out, which is probably best. For your mental picture, I stand all of 5 foot 2 inches and was maybe 125 pounds at the time. Not large. The horse was large. It wasn't a real short ride either. It seemed to last forever. By some part skill and grace, I managed to hang on. As soon as it stopped, my ass bailed off, onto the mucky, cold ground. My husband and friend and everybody were laughing so hard they couldn't breathe. It's a funny memory now. I'm not sure it translates as well to type. You'll just have to use your imagination and picture the least horsey lady around jumping bareback and taking a wild-ass ride around a field in Alaska, while half crap-faced, at the pleasure of my friends, hair trailing in the wind, screams lost to my throat, lol. Yeehaw! Good times. Story 47. So, it's a cool spring night, and me and some friends are hanging out drinking at another friend's house. He's got quoits and cornhole sets up in his large backyard, a sizable fire we're hanging out around. Well, someone brought a jar of moonshine. Fire and moonshine? Can you just taste the foreboding? It was straight up nasty, as it should be, I guess. Anyone that tried it realized one shot was one shot too many. 3/4 of the jar was left, so I got a hold of it, and I'm thinking, this is really high proof. I bet if I threw a little in the fire, it'd look cool. So, went to the fire, poured a bit into the cap, half a shot's worth, and threw it in. The fire responds. It gives a little poof. I did it again. Oh, the joy I felt being the little rebel firebug. But I wanted a bigger boom, so I looked at the jar and looked at the fire. This is where the little light bulb appeared over my head. Then I presume it burned out, because I straight up chucked the rest of the moonshine in. From what someone near the house told me, they just heard, "Holy crap!" then saw a large fireball out in the distance with an idiot diving away from it. That idiot being yours truly. The fireball must have gone 15 feet into the air, and I was standing way too close. Nearly burnt my eyebrows off. I learned my lesson, though. From now on, liquor is for consumption, not combustion. Story 48. I went hiking in Taiwan with two friends during our 2-week trip. We took a train an hour or two west of Taipei to this hiking trail we found on Reddit. No phone, no map, no food, some water, and a half-printed PDF with pictures of where we were supposed to go. 6 hours later, the sun is setting and we're deep in the jungle and very, very lost. We had spent the day looking at waterfalls and looking out across steep ravines and scaling inclines. We were all experienced campers and had climbed/hiked numerous mountains across the US. As the sun set, panic set in, and we prepared to settle in for a night in the jungle. As we start to gather wood and set up a basic camp, we hear gongs and chanting. We quickly follow the music and stumble upon a small Buddhist temple nestled into the mountainside. We approach and are welcomed by a number of monks who graciously invite us in. We didn't speak a word of Taiwanese. They spoke no English. We bathed, changed clothes, ate, and were taken on a tour of the grounds. They showed us their gardens and quarters, their temple and holy relics. We were even invited into their prayer rooms and showed how to pray. We spent the night outside in small beds under the stars. It was quiet, cool, and the most peaceful place I've ever been. At sunrise, we were awoke, fed, and quietly led out of the temple and down a mountain pass back to the train station. We bowed and shook hands. That evening changed my life in ways I cannot explain. Getting lost was the best thing that ever happened to me. You should try it. Story 49. Please do not judge me for this. I was like 4. Because of various circumstances, when I was young, I lived with my best friend in this apartment with our moms, and we were generally pretty unsupervised, so we did a lot of stupid stuff, but by far the dumbest happened this one summer day when I told my best friend that I wanted to go on a roller coaster. I had never been on a roller coaster, and it seemed really fun, but we were two little kids who couldn't just take ourselves to a park, so my best friend said, "I have an idea, grab all the pillows." And so I did. And I followed her down to the laundromat in our complex where she said that if we lined the inside of a dryer with the pillows, it wouldn't hurt and it would be like a roller coaster. So we did that, and she crawled up onto the machine and put some quarters in while I hopped into the dryer. Then she closed the door, and I was rolling around in the dryer for a good solid 15 seconds before I realized that 1, this was not fun, 2, I was getting a bit warm, and 3, I'm claustrophobic. I started pounding on the window saying, "Let me out," but she couldn't get the door open. I don't know how long I was in there, probably no more than a minute, but it was so terrifying. Eventually, she got the door open and I got out, and ever since then, I hate doing laundry. Story 50. I grew up on a tobacco farm, and every tobacco farm has an irrigation pond. My dad was working one day and found a turtle near the pond. I can't remember what variety of turtle, not a snapping turtle, but something medium-sized and harmless. So he decided this could be a neat pet for 5-year-old me, and brought it up to the house in a cardboard box and gave it to me. I remember I was in the backyard, unsupervised, holding this turtle and investigating my new pet. The turtle, of course, was terrified and would tuck itself into its shell anytime I touched it. I was interested in giving it a close-up look while it was tucked inside its shell. I held the turtle up to my eye to peer inside at its head for a few moments to see what I could see. My mom, who was nearby inside the house, recalls suddenly hearing my screams and wails and rushed outside. She recalls finding me sitting on the lawn screaming bloody murder with my eyelid latched in the mouth of the now outstretched turtle. Not sure why exactly, but maybe my blinking eyelid seemed appetizing? Anyways, she ripped the thing off me, and I was a little bruised and terrified, but no permanent damage. Seemed like a good idea at the time. Story 51. Moving across the world alone to be with a girl who decided to start cheating on me during the 2 weeks she arrived before me, cause I had to stay behind to earn money to move down there. And it gets worse. My ex was moving there / doing uni there, and I was done with uni / not tied down, etc. Who got there 2 weeks before me, then met a dude during that small window, cheated on me with him, then said we could be in an open relationship where they keep effing, or I could be homeless / broke, stranded in Australia, as I used all my savings to get there, etc. Much more to that story, but the day I bought the ticket, last minute to save money. She seemed iffy on our web chat as I'm literally about to buy the ticket, and I gave her an out and said, I've been cheated on in my only other two serious 2+ year relationships. Just leave me rather than cheat. And I said, if it's about you being nervous having me move so far / leave everything behind and use savings, then things won't work out. It's a lot of pressure, but I'll take that risk for love. Cliche AF, I know. But I said, if it's about another guy, you have to tell me now. Her selfish ass knew I wouldn't buy the ticket if she mentioned another guy. So she lied, and I pressed buy ticket, and here I am, single, still in Australia 6 years later. Ugh. Here are two funnier / lighter ones I was involved in during uni. My roommates at uni and I decided on our first acid trip in uni during a long weekend break where we stayed on campus in Philly. Also, after realizing dry erase markers could be used on the walls, then wiped off, later resulting in funny stuff written, etc. Well, my friend, D, at our behest, wrote in huge bubble letters, "Kiss the World," lyrics from a song by the jam band Boombox that we'd been introduced to during trip, on his ceiling. Instead of wiping it off in the AM / into the weekend, we thought it was cool and would just wipe it off the day we moved out. Well, inspection day came, end of the semester, and we started cleaning. That is when we learned those dry erase markers, at least on the painted ceiling surface, are only temporary for a week or so and become permanent after. We pinned 2 posters over it during inspection, then had to paint the whole ceiling afterwards. Oh, and we had a game we made up in uni called RoboKiss, and it was so dumb and ended in a tooth going through a bottom lip. Game was simple. Put some red or green cough syrup on your lips, run down the campus apartment's hallway, and use a single person / exercise trampoline to propel yourself up, then kiss the wall at the highest point possible, leaving green and red Robitussin kiss marks to judge. But you have to keep your hand behind your back, so you have to be careful not to smash your head, and of course, the third day of playing this, a different roommate from the same place as story number 1 ends up coming in too hot and presses way too hard for the kiss and puts his tooth through his bottom lip. Funniest part, the last thing he said before he did it are words that lived / live in infamy in my friend group. His stoned, drunk ass just looked at us all, about 6 of us competing, and says, for God knows why, "Kiss my grits, I'm going up." I don't know why, but that still cracks me up to this day. In retrospect, all terrible decisions. While I was instigating part of both, they weren't my stories, so to speak, but if anyone likes these stories, I have a few really good ones that need more context to appreciate, but I'll post them if people don't mind 2 to 4 paragraph length. Story 52. I was at a party in the Berkeley Hills, and the friends I had met there overdid it early and ended up passing out, leaving me to fend for myself in a house full of tech bros playing drinking games. I was definitely pretty drunk and very high when I climbed out a 3rd-story window and tried to shimmy over the roof deck on a small ledge while hanging on to a crosspiece in the house siding with one hand and a bottle of wine in my other hand. At the time, I was thinking, I don't want to deal with people. There's nobody on the roof deck. If I get there, I'll have a nice quiet place to sit, have a drink, and then I'll slip down the back steps and Irish goodbye. A perfect plan. It turned out that crosspiece I was hanging onto was decorative, and I fell backwards to the ground, flailing limbs cartoon style onto something very hard, bounced off that with the wind knocked out of me, and rolled about 30 more feet down a hill covered in rocks and sticks, still holding a half bottle of wine. I must turn into rubber when I drink, because somehow I wobbled home and woke up the next day with a bruise across the center of my back in the shape of the thing I had hit, which turns out was the 2x6 top of a redwood fence. Story 53. I was about 14 when my family visited some friends who had a 10-year-old son. They had a basketball goal in their driveway, but my dad had parked our decrepit 199X Nissan Sentra station wagon right in front of the goal. A few hours of socializing later, I invite their son to a game of basketball. I could have simply asked my dad to move the car, but I grabbed his keys in his coat pocket and put the car in neutral and started to push the car. The 10-year-old, however, was too close and, incidentally, barefoot. When I rolled the car on top of his foot, rather than take it like a man, the boy screamed like a banshee, which caused me to freak out as well as both sets of parents. My dad lunges to push the car away, but in my panic, I had set the parking brake. He ends up with a herniated disc, while the still screaming boy ends up with nothing, not even a scratch. Oh, and it was a 2-hour drive home that evening with my dad barely able to sit and drive. Story 54. Not my idea, my mom's. We were at my grandparents' cottage and it was raining. We live next to a big beach with cliffs leading down it. My mom wants to go for a walk and I argue but eventually relent and go with her. We're walking down one of the cliffside paths and as the rain is getting harder, the rocks are getting more slippery. Suddenly, the ground disappears from under me and my right leg goes under me. I land on my knee hard and fall onto my back, suddenly feeling a sharp, burning pain in my knee. There's a large gash going about the length of my hand down my knee, gushing blood, with 3 large rocks in my knee. I somehow miraculously did not need stitches. I've no idea how to this day that's possible because I couldn't even move my knee. So here I am, hobbling back to the cottage with blood dripping everywhere as I fall over onto the couch, holding a whole roll of paper towel to the knee before passing out. When I came to, my grandmother, an ex-nurse, cleaned out the wound and had bandages on my knee, and said I couldn't use it for a week if I wanted to heal and not bleed again. So take my advice, don't go walking by cliffs in the rain. Story 56. Me and my friend were in computing class one day and he showed me a picture of a website link, where apparently if you type in Illuminati backwards into a hyperlink, you access the NSA's website. My dumbass decided to do this on a school computer. When I went on it, the site asked me for a password on a pop-up. Not a big deal. I closed the pop-up. It then asked for a password again. I'm like, okay, I'll just close the web page. Closed the web page and the pop-up, opened a new tab and went to Google. The password screen came up again. Then my friend points to another screen in the class. They're being asked for a password too. Soon enough, everyone is being asked for a password on their search engines, even the teacher as well. As well as passwords, they're also being asked for CAPTCHA, and some can't access websites. Me and my friend are both thinking, did we just break the school network? I crap you not. About 2 minutes later, the IT technician in the school came in and said that the servers are down in the entire school. He also said that the servers are also down in every school in the area. For about a week, the school internet had problems and everyone had to constantly type in passwords and captchas in order to search anything on Google. Story 57. Went to my friend's house, 3 of us. Asked him to see his airsoft pistol. He did tell us on the way he had one, and I was curious as I never saw a gun. And his dad allowed the 3 of us to play as his son knew how it worked and the safety measures. You load the magazine, pull back the barrel, no idea how to call that, and you shoot. Simple. Got the brilliant idea of scaring them by shooting it without any bullets, except that it already had 1 bullet in the chamber and I didn't realize it. Took out the magazine, put it on some random desk while they were distracted, and as soon as one of them looked at me, I shot aiming at his eye. He screamed in pain. I said he was faking and showed the magazine on the desk. Then he ran towards the bathroom while the other friend tells me, dude, there was blood in his hand. Felt that cold feeling rushing through my entire body and went to check what happened. Luckily, the shot hit his ear and was just a minor injury. Thank God I have awful aim. Story 58. This is a story of pure stupidity, like seriously painful, what the duck were you thinking stupidity. When I was 8 or so, my sister and I were playing and I was pretending to be a dog. She had found a rule like a ducking moron, I put it in my mouth and play growled at her. She yanked it out and my 3 front teeth along with it. Didn't feel a thing at first, but I knew something was wrong as my sister's face paled in horror and the blood started pouring from my mouth. I felt my mouth and found a massive gap between my teeth. I freaked. My sister freaked. We rushed to the bathroom and my sister insisted I rinse my mouth with water, making everything look 50 times worse. My grandparents, who were taking care of us for the summer at the time, banged on the door to know what was going on and why I was crying. And my sister, in absolute panic, tries to comfort me by saying, maybe no one will notice. They noticed. The fact alone that my t-shirt was covered in blood gave up the ghost alone. My parents, who were in the USA, we were in Denmark, had to be called at 3 a.m. their time for my grandfather to ask them if my front teeth were my baby teeth. My dad asked if I had lost a tooth, and my poor grandfather had to explain I had lost 3. Thankfully, they were baby teeth, and while my sister and I can sometimes fight like it's World War III, she didn't get in any more trouble than I did as we were told that we were idiots. There was never any doubt that she hadn't meant for anything to happen. Story 60. Walking home from my middle school that was in a more secluded area and a good distance away from my house. There were many times where some adult would offer to give me a ride, and I tried to keep calm even though in my mind I was freaking out because I watched Law and Order and Criminal Minds and would have to change up which route I took to get to my house to avoid anything happening, and never told my mom of the bad experiences and kept walking home till I graduated and went to high school. My walk took me like over an hour to get home, but I kept convincing my mom to let me do it. I remember finally being in a neighborhood so close to my house and feeling safe, and then a fear of noticing some group of guys was staring at me and catcalling me. I recognized them as sketchy guys from school and was prepared to smack them with my violin case if they tried to come up to me. I ran faster than I ever have until I was home, but to be honest, the actual scariest experience I had was a tiny chihuahua chasing me and barking at me till I was at a good distance away from the chihuahua's house. Story 61. Long response. Sorry, guys. Oh man, this should be relatively entertaining. This was just this past Christmas. I was 17. My family tends to get together every Christmas Eve, with some people stopping by the next morning. I live with my grandparents, and they get presents for all the grandkids. They usually stop over at some point during Christmas Day. As everyone was getting around for our little party on Christmas Eve, food cooking, punch bowls being made, remember that one, ladies and gents. This was one of the few years where my mom was actually around for Christmas. That's a story in and of itself, and she was helping get the punch bowls. We usually had two around, so I'm hanging out in the kitchen talking with my uncles, and one of them tells me to loosen up, which my mother had already said earlier that evening. What do I see as I look over? Well, I'm glad you asked. Our punch bowl is usually just pineapple juice mixed with ginger ale, and it's pretty good. Well, I look over and see my mom pouring a bottle of coconut rum into one of the punch bowls. Not just a part of the bottle, but the whole thing. So the night goes on for a little bit, and eventually, after continually being pestered about being too uptight and needing to loosen up, my grandma, mom, and uncle and I decide to start drinking. And that's where the fun began. In my defense, the punch actually tasted pretty good, but after a few drinks, I went up to my room, deciding that I needed to get away from everybody for a little bit. I was just chilling in my room, trying to rest a little, and I have the revelation. I have access to my phone. Maybe I should talk to somebody for a little. If I could, I assure you I would slap myself across the face so hard at this exact moment. So I start looking through my contacts, and incidentally, my ex texts me. We weren't exactly on bad terms, so this wasn't that out of the blue. I ask her if she wants to call, and we do. For 5 hours. I didn't remember what I said until the next morning. It seemed enjoyable and fun to me at the time, but little did I realize that I called her Thunder Tits. For the record, she's rather well endowed. At least 3 times, admitted that if I wasn't in a relationship, I'd probably try with her again. The next morning, I wake up feeling like I was hit by a goddamn train, but I immediately text her asking, what did I do? She explains and takes it in stride, but then she admits that she actually still liked me. Drinking seemed like a good idea at the time. It, in fact, was not. Story 62. I was young and working in a zoo, and a day came when I was ordered to put down a couple of fowl due to fighting in the enclosure. I had to put down a few birds with my bare hands during hunting trips, so I thought nothing of it. I had already perfected a technique for fowl especially. Basically, you hold the fowl with one hand and its head with your other hand, then you yank your shoulders back and the head pops clean off, no problem. I figured this would be no different and grabbed 2 of our interns to show them a handy and ethical way to put down an animal. The animals in question were an ill-tempered mallard and his duck nemesis. I picked up the mallard, calmed it down a bit, and took it to the back where the zoo visitors can't see me, and showed the interns my immaculate technique. Plop goes the head. The mallard flaps its wings for a bit. I guide the stream of blood to the ground, and off he goes to Hades. I figured the duck would be no different, and noticed that there weren't any visitors near the fowl pond, so I picked up the duck and decided for some reason that it's easier and faster to do it right away so that we can get on with our day. I was wrong. A big difference between a duck and a mallard is their size. A mallard has a neck about as thick as your index and middle finger combined. It doesn't offer much resistance. A duck's neck is about 2 to 3 times as thick and notably more muscular, as they're bred to be meaty. So I grabbed body with one hand, took the head with my other hand, said farewell to the duck and yanked, and I didn't feel it pop. Instead, my hand slid along its neck all the way to its head, skinning the poor duck from shoulders up. The duck figured something was wrong and started flapping its wings, while my intern started frantically looking around to see if any visitors were witnessing the horror show unfolding before them. Meanwhile, my mind was racing, trying to figure out how to just end the duck and stop its suffering. I grabbed a sharp rock, placed the duck's bare neck to a bigger rock, and started bashing. Thankfully, the meaty neck offered no noteworthy resistance to the improvised executioner's rock, and separated from the body with 3 or 4 good knocks. All in all, it took less than 10 seconds to go from code red to a dead duck. So in the end, it probably had on average a happier existence than your usual duck raised for food, despite everything. So there, definitely not my proudest moment of working with animals, but a valuable lesson to our 2 interns. If you're reading this, I'm sorry you had to witness it. Okay, so I might just be ignorant here. I had no idea that this was a thing. Why can't you just relocate the animals or release them from captivity? Why do you have to brutally murder both of them in such a fashion because they're fighting in an enclosure? That just seems a little extreme. Maybe there's laws and regulations that kind of mandate or protect that kind of stuff, but that just sounds absolutely ridiculous. Story 63. Okay, hopefully this was too long ago for legal repercussions. Lawn darts, arrows, Swiss Army knives, potatoes? You guys just don't think big. In my city, there's a road that runs along the edge of a bluff that's fenced off. The cliff is probably about 80 feet high, and at the bottom are a couple of houses, maybe 30 yards from the base. Just off the road at the top of the bluff was an old gateway, with pillars consisting of rectangular stones about 2 foot by 2 foot by 1 foot. This was almost 50 years ago, so I may be a little foggy in my memories. Oh, and old age. The pillars had been pushed over, the rocks were just lying there. So, the idea: get a couple friends, carry one of the rocks to the bluff, drop it off, and curse smash in cloud of dust. Must rejoicing among young teenage boys. So we did. As God is my witness, I didn't think a huge rock would bounce. It did. Twice. Then it hit the front door of a house mid-door and carried door and frame into the building, and may have proceeded through the floor into the basement. We didn't hang around to survey the damage, as we all simultaneously remembered a pressing engagement elsewhere, and left the scene in separate directions. Funny, my best friend brought this up for the first time just a few years ago, saying, "Did I dream this?" and starting the story, which I finished. Story 64. Flooding my kitchen and more by not turning the water off at the shutoff valve when installing a new washing machine. So I'd just been posted to a new base in the forces and was in one of these barrack blocks where you've got 6 rooms to a corridor and a communal bathroom and kitchen. I was the only one in that corridor, and the kitchen had crap old washing machine and nothing else. Only options were to buy my own or use the on-base laundrette, which was beyond awful. So I bought my own, as well as a fridge and tumble dryer, and figured I'd get anyone else who moved into the corridor to pay towards if they wanted to use it. That worked out great, by the way. Problem was, the shutoff valve, if that's the right word, was so old and rusted that I could not turn it off. So I figured, how fast could the water really be coming out of the pipe? I'll just move them next to each other and swap the old one with a new one real quick. So it turns out fast. A lot. So much water. Powerfully too. The moment I half loosened the old connector, the water punched the rest of it clean off, and for the life of me, I could not get the new one on. My toes were submerged when I stood there for a while, thinking what a terrible idea this was. Turning the water off would involve running into the guard room, hoping they knew how to turn off that part of the base's water, and piss a crap ton of people off and get in the crap myself. F that, I thought, and somehow I managed to get the new one on. By that point, I was maybe ankle deep. The corridor is flooded, the bathroom, the first 2 rooms, and some of the next 2. Lucky me, I was at the end. It took me the best part of 2 days to get rid of all that water by painstakingly using a dustpan to scoop it into a sink. So that's all pretty awful. But wait, there's more. See, I had not a good idea at the time, but in my head, an amazing idea. I figured there would be a lot of water by the time I got the new one on, though nothing like would happen. So I had a genius idea: to put a spare mattress down against the wall to catch the water. That mattress got completely saturated and was utterly immovable for weeks as water slowly dripped out the effing monstrosity. So yeah, 2 for 1 on that day. Facepalm still to this day. Story 65. "Hey, come move in with us next year. Be great." Except we didn't know at the time that the place was being sold to a new landlord. More space, yes, and he did fix the oven, but that was about it. Landlord broke the tenancy agreement and rental laws multiple times. He didn't give a crap about the broken window, so air circulation could only be done by propping open a fire door. Nope. Didn't give a crap about the broken back door, so the ground floor slash basement flooded several times, and a flatmate's ex broke into the house one night, stole the tenant's food. He owned several businesses too. Stole a PS2, stole a laptop, stole a load of kit for a uni society stored there. All were donated to the society in the first place. Came around without notice, allowed other people in without notice, wouldn't fix a pipe leak above hole, wouldn't add legally required safety features to the fire escape that he rendered very illegal after purchase, took out safety lights and removed the final ladder to the ground, so you had a nearly 7-foot jump off a chest-high railing in case of fire. Oh, and let people into my room without me present, illegal, and tried to evict me without notice or cause while I was abroad, knowing I was abroad and rent was paid for the next 4 months, super duper illegal. I was a day away from taking him to court for breaking loads of laws for him to let me in, get my things from my absolutely wonderful flatmates, and give me back my deposit. The house was barred from housing students on our report to the uni, but my flatmates were awesome. Story 66. I came back from university winter break a day earlier than my two buddies. I had time on my hands, so I went to PetSmart, bought 1,000 live crickets, and released them into their dorm room. I thought it would be great. They would walk in and see crickets everywhere. I also thought that they would chirp at night and keep them awake. Turns out, pet store crickets don't do that. I see my buddy walk into the dorm building and I say hi. He's very pissed. Unbeknownst to me, he had just broken up with his girlfriend the day before. I follow him to the room, wishing the crickets would magically appear. He opens his door and there's not a single cricket in sight. He starts telling me the story of his breakup as he's unpacking. He opens his drawer and a cricket jumps at him. He then finds that his drawer is covered in crickets. Long story short, he found crickets everywhere and he was not amused. Normally, he was a good-natured guy, but the breakup really set him in a bad mood. To make matters worse, my dumbass didn't stop to think that the crickets would migrate. Before long, they were ending up in students' dorms all throughout the hall. Somebody ratted me out, so I ended up in the dean's office having a meeting with him and the president where they were trying to get me to confess to the crime. I would not admit to it, and they ended the meeting by saying that if there were still cricket problems within 2 weeks, they would exterminate and add the bill to my account, $10,000. Thankfully, the crickets died off pretty quickly and no further action was taken against me. Story 67. Okay, so I had a date with my girlfriend a little more than a year ago. We lived about an hour apart. When I drove up to get her, I came to a road closed due to construction sign. So I took the detour it had me go on, but it just brought me to the same closed road, only just a few miles north. Well, from what I could see, the road was still tarred and there was other traffic on it. So I turned onto the road, drove on it like everyone else, and made it to my date's house just fine. We go out to eat, catch a movie. Great time. By the time I drop her off and I'm on my way back home, it's dark. I come to the same road. Well, I think to myself, since it's still drivable, I'll just take myself home without the detour. Every other road closed sign I come to, it's sitting on the shoulder, seeming like it's there to let you pass. The whole drive was fine up until the end. When I got close to the spot I started at on my way to my date's house, there's another sign, yet again sitting on the shoulder. So I drive right past, and all of a sudden the tar turns to gravel. Still okay and still drivable, but then the gravel turns to pure sand, and soon enough, whole front bottom half of my car is pretty much buried. And made the situation so much better was my phone had just died, and I had decided it would be a good day to leave my car charger next to my bed at home. And it's midnight. After trying to dig myself out, I ended up having to walk up the road and bang on someone's window because their doorbell wasn't working and knocking wasn't either. I finally get a married couple to let me use my phone, call my dad, and get me out of there. It was about 3 a.m. when I got in bed. Story 68. I was on vacation with a group and we were at a bar and I said to myself, drink an Irish coffee, what could go wrong? Apparently it had alcohol in it, so I said to my unaware drunk self, that drunk girl just drank 60% of a mojito in one go, looks cute. So I started brushing her hair like the last dubious person on the planet. Thanks to a friend of mine, he helped us on our way on the entry of the hotel. I hugged that girl in a friendly manner and said that that her hair smells and needs to change the shampoo, then quickly cancel as I started to partially wake up, but she was still drunk hard, and me and my friend decided to carry her to her room. Her roommate was there and started a dispute that if we weren't careful, we would have woke up the whole hotel and get us in trouble. Also, a couple of people came and go through that room and made noise. In my partially drunk mind, I thought it was a bit our fault for letting her get so drunk, and I started apologizing to her roommate and my friend. We tried to get her, the drunk girl, to sleep, but she refused until she didn't have her shower, and her roommate took her to her shower because she couldn't even stand straight before I left the room. The drunk one peeked her head over the corner and asked us boys if we wanted to join her, but her roommate intervened and let us out. I went to my room, opened Discord, wrote this story to one of my friends with a pinch of salt because we almost were in trouble due to her, but I woke up from drunkenness completely and deleted those messages before he could see them because it was 1 a.m. and started to feel bad. I also scared the girls from a neighboring balcony because I laughed too hard at one of her jokes. I peeked my head over. The girls laughed it off and saluted me, while the boys they had as guests told me to F off and went to sleep. Who else could put alcohol in coffee but the Irish? Maybe the Scottish. Story 69. I can actually answer this one. When I was 11, a good friend of mine and myself were having a BB gun war. He was hiding behind one tree and I was hiding behind the other. We'd pop out from behind the tree and shoot at each other, but really we're just hitting the tree or whatnot. I was using a half-broken Red Ryder BB gun rifle. Using the lever action failed to load a BB into the chamber. It would load the air pressure, but not the BB itself. So to get it to shoot, I had to use the lever action to load the air pressure and then physically drop a BB down the barrel, then aim and shoot. It actually worked fine, just took longer to load. Well, I realized that I had the capability of gaining a distinct tactical advantage by dropping multiple BBs down the barrel instead of just one, effectively turning my Red Ryder lever action BB gun rifle into a BB shotgun. So I put my plan into action, load up with extra BBs down the barrel, then pop out from behind the tree, yell my friend's name to get him to poke his head out, and hip-fired that sucker. Worked like a charm. I won the fight. Nailed him in the cheekbone directly beneath his right eye. He immediately dropped his gun and held his face yelling, "Ah, I'm hit! I'm hit!" Pretty hilarious story now, but looking back, yeah, that was not a good idea, lol. I was this close to severely damaging his eyesight, if not blinding him in that eye completely. But hey, they say experience is the best teacher, right? That was our last BB gun fight. Story 70. Last year, my dad was diagnosed with ALS. He told my mom that he hadn't ever seen the east coast of the United States and wanted to see it before he could no longer move. My parents are older and don't work, but they're doing okay. But without a job, they couldn't qualify for a loan. I do okay and have good credit, so I asked my mom if I could take out the loan for her and dad. They said they could afford the payments, and if anything happened to them, they own their home outright, which could be sold. I didn't want to do it for obvious reasons, but it was a very emotional time. My dad was getting worse slowly. He lost the ability to walk a few months later, and my mom kept asking, begging me to do this for her. Finally, I agreed. How can I stand in the way of his dying wish? What kind of son would that make me, I wondered. If I didn't do it, and then he just wasted away at home, waiting to die from one of the various cruel ways ALS kills you, how guilty would I feel for being so selfish? They get the RV and go on their trip, and they have a wonderful time. Now they're back, and I ask where I can sell it, and she tells me that she isn't getting any bites. I say that we should lower the price, which she replies that she can't afford to take a loss on it at all. I ask her what she's planning. She tells me she'll just keep making payments until it sells, whenever that ends up happening. Now she's telling me that I should have never agreed to do this for her and that she'll keep making the payments. That if I cared about my family's financial security, I would have never done it. Luckily, if the crap hit the fan, I can afford the payments. It would just be tight. Story 71. This is a lengthy story, but at the end I've attached a quick TLDR for the less patient. I was having a moving away party in this cul-de-sac in the mountains where I lived. I was 14 or so, with brothers, cousins, and a few best friends running around at midnight. There's a curfew at dusk, which this whole story is based on. We went to the local park with a lake to play hide-and-seek tag. This is extremely fun but dangerous, who would have thought, with local wildlife. Bears, cougars, and the like. Local cop is driving around and this time checking the park with a spotlight. ohcrap.jpg. Everyone makes their way to the street from where he came to reconvene. After walking the streets for 20 minutes, while we were in a dark patch between light posts, he turns the corner behind us. Everyone hides in this ditch that's just down the hill to the woods. Have you ever done something and realized mid-action that it was extremely stupid? Everyone is running down said incline or sliding. The first person down behind the shrubbery turns back to see me Superman dive from the top, after abruptly slamming and sliding down the rest of the hill. Everyone is chuckling as I pull myself up into a low crouch. Cop passes us, so we wait an extra minute to make sure we're in the clear. After we climb back to the road and continue the walk back home, I have the sensation that I'm losing heat. I sort of stumble and catch myself from falling over. My older brother peeks back and starts laughing hysterically. Confused, everyone else checks what's making him laugh. I had landed on a rock on the way down and had a nasty gash from above my ankle to below my knee, missing bone and muscle on the front side of my calf. After the adrenaline ended, I could only limp, but felt no pain. Made it home, wrapped it up, and passed out from blood loss. TLDR, Supermaned it down a ditch and narrowly missed breaking my leg. Story 72. I tried to help my mom settle my dad's estate. She didn't know where to begin and lives 2 hours away. I had helped my dad through the same process a few years earlier with my grandmother's estate. On the way to the funeral home, the day after my dad died, my mom was talking about selling my dad's house. So I asked her what she planned to do with the money, so I could get a feel for just how much she knew of what had to be done. My dad had 2 mortgages on the house and had recently had a new AC unit and ductwork installed that he was still paying on. She went nuts in the car, telling me that she had a lot of debt that she had to worry about. She said that I wanted the money from the house. I tried to interject, but she kept on saying she couldn't believe I wanted to know, that it had to be coming from my husband. Finally, we got to the funeral home and I ignored her as best I could until my brother got there. He could tell something was up and asked. She started going off again, saying that she was my dad's wife. They'd been separated for 15 years and she lives with her boyfriend now, and the house was hers. Everyone tried to calm her down and tell her that no one wanted to take anything. We weren't even going to contest her having the house. She wasn't having it. Then she said she'd lost her daughter over all this. She paid to have my dad cremated, but refused to schedule a visitation. Then she walked the 5 miles to my dad's house. My brother scheduled and paid for the visitation. When asked, she refused to give the funeral home his DD-214 so he could have a military honor guard. She since trespassed me from my dad's property, accused me of stealing money from his bank account, there was a hold on the account, and accused me of withholding the name of his life insurance company. He didn't have any. It's been a month and she still refuses to let anyone onto the property. Story 73. Riding my 10-speed bike down a 20-foot high pile of snow when I was 13. On a warm winter day, my friends and I were riding our bikes around town. We saw a parking lot that had a couple really tall piles of snow from a few weeks of snowfalls. The snow was starting to melt a little, but I thought it would be cool to see how fast I could go off the steep hill. I dragged my bike up and jumped on. The first 15 feet down was great. Then the slope changed and my front wheel dug in. I managed to go over the handlebars in a seated position and land right on my butt. I thought that wasn't so bad, but where's my bike? Then it hit me, right on top of the head. One of those shots that make your teeth hurt from the force. I've got a pretty hard head, so it didn't faze me too much. After 10 seconds of being kind of stunned, I just picked up my bike and caught up to my friends. When we stopped later, I realized I had a lump on my head with a little divot in the middle. I had about a half-inch cut on my head. I didn't tell anyone because I was afraid of getting in trouble for being so stupid. Actually, the scar it left is kinda useful. It can't really be seen except when I part my hair. I can use it to tell hairstylists that's where to part my hair.